topic is expert tips to land your next job. Our panelists today are Ms. Kim von Ahsen, Mr. J.R. Constance, Ms. Abbey Wichman, and Ms. Debra Rodahl. And just in case she hops on later, Ms. Kristen Croom will try to, she got a little delay, but she'll try to hop on. Guys, if I could just get you to introduce yourself, just say a little brief intro, and then we'll get straight into the questions.
So you want me to go first? I'm Kim von Ahsen. I am the manager of client services for the clinical laboratory at Unity Point Health Des Moines in Des Moines, Iowa. I have been in my management role for about 13 years now. Prior to that, I was a point of care coordinator, and then prior to that, I was a generalist, and I'm the Region 6 director.
All right, I'll go next. Hi, I'm Debra Rodahl, and I am Vice President of Hospital Operations for St. Joseph's Hospital, which is a kind of a medium-sized hospital in St. Paul, Minnesota. But prior to that, I was responsible for laboratory services for our healthcare system. So I've had a lot of opportunities within the laboratory for many, many years. So I've been in management really since 1985. I'm a past president of ASCLS.
I can go next. My name's Abbey Wichman. I am the outgoing lab manager of at a 25-bed critical access hospital in Montana. And I've been in this position for about 7 years, and I'm training the current new manager. So yeah, and I am the current Montana president.
I'm J.R. Constance. I'm the president of my own consulting company. It happens to be called J.R. Constance and Associates. Longtime laboratory person. I have, oh gosh, over 40 years of laboratory experience. Getting on the back end of my career, I'm also past president of ASCLS.
Thank you guys so much for being panelists. Those of you who are attending and would like to ask a question, if you can drop them in the chat, I will be reading them out. I am going to go dark, but I will be reading out the questions in the chat. So I do have one question that was emailed to us by a Miss Karen. It says, I'll be graduating in 2022 from my program, and I was wondering what employers look for in someone so new to the field. What are the qualifications and skills that I should focus on before I graduate? And y'all can just chime in.
No one wants to go first. I can start. Okay, so I'll take the perspective of the small hospital here. For me and the hospital I work for, I think what we're looking for most is someone who's moldable, adaptable, that can easily pick up and be the kind of tech we want them to be. So they're listening, they're learning. You know, they have to kind of fit into that culture, and that's what we're kind of looking for, is someone that can jump in and adapt. The skill set we are willing to teach, you know, and I think most labs are. So it's not about skills at that point in your career, in my mind. It's more about being a part of a team and adapting to that team.
All right, I'll go next. And I'm going to agree with Abby. I think what we're looking for is people who can come in and be part of a team and see that it's teamwork, whether you're working with your fellow laboratory people in the lab or out in the patient care areas, our nurses and our health unit coordinators, et cetera. So it's that person who can come in and help be part of the team member. I think it's so important. There's a lot of different environments that you can get into when you have your first job in the lab, and they're all going to be different and unique, and you're not going to know up front which one you might land in. So I think it's being open to those possibilities. Maybe it's the night shift in a small hospital where you're going to be the jack of all trades, or you know, maybe you're going to be somewhere else and you're going to end up in a specialty lab, and you're going to have to you know, learn to be an expert in that particular specialty area.
Kim, you got nothing here?
No, I think those are really good points. I mean, I think when you're first coming out, it really is about, yeah, being adaptable, realizing that, yeah, you may not know what your favorite thing's going to be, and kind of having that openness. We know you're not going to know everything, and just being willing to learn and listen, you know, taking that good feedback, because it's going to be stressful. I mean, it's going to be new, and there's a lot of things going on, and just really it is how well you can persevere through that and realize that, you know, that's what we're looking for. You really have to be part of that team. But yeah, everybody will be trained. I haven't worked for a place yet that doesn't provide that or focus on that. So I don't think that should be your major concern.
And I think I can only agree with everyone else who's already spoken. For a new grad coming out, you know, I think what we're really looking for is you know, some confidence that, you know, you can come in and do the job, but it's really more of a, are you a fit for our organization or for our laboratory, and less about your skill set, because I'd much rather have someone coming out of med tech school who has no bad habits than hire someone who's been in the field for 20 years and they have to do it their way. And so from my perspective, it's a plus being a new graduate and coming right out of a program.
Thank you guys so much. I have another question. From a student perspective, is there something that they can do as a student that makes them shine kind of on a resume, like student involvement, or, you know, something that if you know you're going to be hiring a new grad, most likely, something that'll really push them to the top of the consideration list?
Abby, gonna jump in?
Sure. Yep. I'll start. Yeah, we'll just kind of stick to the order maybe. So let's say for me, I'm going to look at volunteer opportunities, ASCLS. You know, that's a strong thing for me, of course, but that's not a must. But I think that if you see that this person is involved in various activities, it shows that they kind of go above and beyond in their life. So it kind of puts a good front for who they're going to be in the lab as well. As far as the background, you know, I think a lot of the schools are great. I don't look for MLT versus MLS. I'm looking at just the ability to, for me, so then really what I guess I'm saying is it's more than the resume for me, but it's good to have those kind of things that set you apart in terms of volunteerism for me, so.
Yeah, no, I also agree with Abby on that one as well. I think, you know, if you're a student member of ASCLS or other professional organization, also show what have you done as a student? Have you had a chance to go to Washington, D.C., you know, and be a chance to kind of advocate for the profession, or have you, you know, written articles? I mean, just what are those things that you've done as a student that helps to set you apart, and also obviously you learn a lot from those experiences. I also don't forget to use your past work employment experiences, because there's a lot of things you learn from your first jobs, whether you're working as a student, maybe you're working at a Walmart or, you know, or a fast food place. It doesn't matter, because there's some really important things that you learn in those experiences. So be willing to kind of share what you learned from those experiences, how you were part of that team. You know, maybe you were kind of in charge for shifts and things like that. So don't hesitate to reach into those experiences, even though they're not connected to the lab.
That's what I was going to say. Don't undersell your previous work history. Because you're coming out of school, I mean, part of what we would look at is, you know, if we're looking for that team member, did you have customer service? Did you take a customer service lead position? Those things are important. So don't leave that kind of thing out thinking it doesn't matter, because it actually will matter when you're looking at a resume.
And I wish I had something to add.
We'll let you go first next time.
All right.
Our question in the chat is a good piggyback from a non-traditional student perspective. It's lengthy, but I will do my best to read. After years in the corporate world, sorry, this is from one of our attendees. After years in the corporate world as an industrial scientist, I decided to make a pivot in my career. This led me to currently pursuing a graduate degree in medical laboratory science. I'll be graduating with my master's degree in the summer of 2021. However, since joining my program, I have spoken with a few professionals and managers. The consensus is that past job experiences as an industrial scientist and quality professional are not transferable and or relevant in the clinical setting. In addition, as an individual that is constantly looking for ways to better myself, as well as seeking ways to bring skills acquired from my past career into this new setting, last year I successfully sat for the Certified Professional in Healthcare Quality examination by the National Association for Healthcare Quality and officially became certified as a professional in healthcare quality. My questions are, would you agree that these job skills are not relevant in the clinical setting as from a management perspective?
Let's reverse the order. JR, you go first.
I get the tough one. I can see if you were coming right out of a career as an industrial scientist and trying to move into the laboratory, why there would be some hesitation about that, unless you can show how your skill set would be transferable. I guess it would cause some concern. For me as a laboratory manager or director, the fact that you have a master's in medical laboratory science, that you have the certified professional in healthcare quality, I see those things all as a plus. And I would certainly, if you can take that and transfer that to, a quality position in the laboratory, a lab quality manager type position, I certainly see that that skill set would be transferable.
When I read this, I was like, I would say that they are transferable. I think, again, it may be the onus on you during an interview to educate the manager that you're interviewing with, their supervisor, what your role was and how it might take a little bit of homework on your behalf to educate us on how these are transferable. But quality is definitely a transferable skill. And to be certified would be a bonus. It would just also depend on what you're going for. If you were going for a more leadership role, then definitely I think that would be considered. If you're just starting out in a generalist position, it's a nice background that will be helpful for you, but I don't think that would be necessarily the first top thing that somebody would be looking at. They'd still be looking for that team kind of enthusiasm.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think you didn't note in here if you spent time in kind of clinical experiences, so you've had a chance to actually work in, say, a hospital type lab setting. If you have, you'll see how all those pieces fit together, and I make sure to call that out on how you see all of those experiences that you have fit together. It's certainly going to make you a better employee, even if it's not a key skill set for a new hire. It's still going to make you a better employee, and it's certainly going to help you in your whatever your career ladder aspirations are.
Yeah, I agree with everyone here on this one, of course. I think everything we have in our past we bring to the table in all this. So our history shapes our future in a lot of ways. And I think that these are all wonderful traits to have, especially the quality piece. I also think that sometimes as laboratorians, we kind of put ourselves in, that bucket a little bit, but we are completely capable of doing more for our organizations and our hospitals as well. So, compliance and risk and, the quality positions you talk about are all big functions, especially in a small hospital like I work in. So there's always ways to grow as well. I mean, besides just getting into the laboratory, I think those things you're going to bring to the table can help you grow into the future too. So.
Going back to CVs and resumes, how important is having those other work experiences, fast food, retail, et cetera, on one's resume after being in the laboratory profession for a couple of years? I've always heard to try to keep my resume at one page long, but I often have a hard time deciding what is more important to fit onto that one page, such as all of my experience versus more of my volunteer work.
This is actually one of my favorite type of questions because I try to keep my resume up to date, and it's 4 pages long now. And my CV, which has got everything on it, is like 12 pages. And so the longer you've been in the field, obviously, the less important your earlier experience is going to have. So if you've been working in the laboratory for 2 to 4 years and you've had a couple of different jobs, that's what you want to focus on. I'm going to be looking at what, at that point, what's your experience in the laboratory? What areas of the laboratory have you worked? You know, things like I worked night shift by myself in blood bank, you know, my first job out. And the longer you're in, the less you worry about that early stuff. Because if I put everything on my resume, just the work experience, mine would be incredibly long. So now I just put about the last 7 years of experience on my resume, because that's, you know, as I'm applying for consulting work or laboratory management type positions, that's what's important to people that are interviewing me. So that retail work or that fast food work, after 3 or 4 or 5 years, it's much less important. My recommendation would be, if you've been in the same job for those 2, 3, or 4 years, and you're looking to leave your organization to go somewhere else, and you have some leadership experience in those retail positions, you were a shift lead or you were a manager or something like that, you might want to consider leaving that on. But other than that, that experience is much less important after you've been in the field for a little while.
Yeah, and I think what JR is saying is important. You've got to really have a resume that fits the position you're applying for, and that's really going to determine what's going to be on that resume. I think it's incredibly important to have a resume. With the system that we use, without a resume, it's really hard to review a candidate. So it's still, even though a lot of the systems today will kind of take your resume and parse it out automatically, I still think it's incredibly important to attach your resume. It makes it just easier for us to look at it, because sometimes those systems are limiting. But yeah, I think it's the last few years. And even if you're at the same position, at the same organization, but you've had multiple positions, you can kind of combine those together and shorten that resume. So, but yeah, I'm not too much. I don't go crazy if somebody's 2 pages long. I mean, if there's relevant, important information there, I think it's important to be included.
Right. I agree with both of them. Although I'm less inclined to read a full 4, 5, 6 page resume than I am a 1 or 2 page resume. But I agree with Kim. I think your resume should reflect the position you're seeking. So if you're seeking a position that's going to be more in leadership or management, and you've got some of those experiences in your background, you want to add them to your resume and just explain that you included that because you've had those experiences. And then you mentioned the volunteer aspects, and I think the volunteer aspects start becoming more important than those early positions that you may have, particularly if your volunteer experience really show, you know, the things that you have done in addition to the work experiences. So I would favor your volunteer experiences after you've been in a job for a while. But again, I would tailor your resume to the position you're seeking.
Yeah, I guess the only thing I would add is that, 2 pages, I'm kind of more of a 2-page resume. If it gets much longer than that, I kind of have a tendency to kind of somewhat get bored. I think the other thing to consider is that you can offer up a lot of the things you're talking about in that interview process. So there's ways to interject those things that are strengths, even though you don't want to put it on your resume. So I think that's the other thing I would just add. And I also agree with Deb in that the volunteer piece is really important. And that's kind of maybe coming from that critical access perspective, because we're a community and therefore we want that piece of volunteerism, because we ask our leaders if that is your choice. And even in our bench positions, we ask those folks to get involved in our community. So that's where that helps us a lot to see that volunteer piece.
Thank you so much. Flipping to the interview side of things, what is the biggest interview faux pas that you have witnessed in the process? Comedy's a good thing.
No, there's a point where, so I've had a couple interviews. I've had one interview internally. Like internal ones tend to be more of a struggle for me, where there seems to be a little bit more faux pas than I think external. I think an external person tends to prepare more for interviews, and I think that's where you have to be really careful. If you're an internal candidate applying for something, you need to treat it as you're an external candidate, that I don't know you. You need to still sell yourself. And I've had people either talk nothing but money, which is okay, but that should not be the only thing you tell me why you want the job. I recently had internal candidates that just didn't even prepare. Like it was almost, it kind of offended me that they just assumed that they should just get the job, and they had no questions and they didn't prepare for the interview. I mean, they really it was kind of embarrassing. I mean, I had 9 people apply for a point of care coordinator position, and I had 2 people prepare for it because one was external and 8 of them were internal.
One of my favorite, we were doing a panel interview it was an entry-level manager position. And so there were a group of us in the room interviewing these group of people as they came through. And one of the questions on the question list that I'm not always a fan of, but we had it on there, which was, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And this person said, well, I see myself in your job. So she was looking right at me, and and I would just laugh that off. That didn't bother me, but I'm here to tell you the rest of the panel thought that was extremely arrogant of her. So, it was just kind of interesting. I mean, she was trying to exemplify that she wants to be a go-getter, but that probably was an overreach that turned the rest of the group of panel people off. I think I agree with Kim. I think there's always that problem if people don't prepare for an interview and it doesn't come across well. And then the other issue I think I had once was the employee, the person I was interviewing was an external candidate, and she spent the entire interview telling me how horrible her previous boss was. So that doesn't work real well.
So how do you answer that where do you see yourself in 5 years question? What kind of an answer are you looking for?
Well, it's not my favorite question, because I don't always, it doesn't help me discern one candidate from another. But, I guess you're obviously looking for somebody who's interested in some growth and development, but this person was overshooting it a little bit. 5 years.
I don't have an example for that one.
Yeah, I don't have a real example either. It's more of a feeling I get in some of these interviews that, that I don't know. It's more involved around the person interviewing than around what they can contribute to the team. That sometimes sets me off a little bit. But it's, you're applying for that position for a reason, and it is about you in some regards, but don't make it all about you in that moment. Make it about what you can contribute to the team, I think. I just wanted to add, JR, to your question about where you see yourself in 5 years. I had a really good answer to that once. And the gentleman answered, I see myself happy with my family and supporting them the best I can. And that was, for me, that was just really important, that the family came first for them, and that being in that job potentially could be the right fit for them, so that we could offer that for them. So I just thought that was a really good answer. It wasn't anything to do with work. It was about what they wanted to be for their personal life and their family. So I thought that was a good answer.
Thank you so much. So we have another question in the chat. I am on my final semester of MLS. I was wondering how difficult it is to find a job for international students, especially if I'm planning a long-term career in the United States, and that may include the sponsorship for an H-1B visa or green card.
I have not had experience with that necessarily. I don't know, Kim, have you?
We have, we've had a few successful cases. And I know that our organization, I think it's really feeling out if the organization supports that, because they do need to support it. But we do have a few employees that were international that we did support their visa applications, and they do work for us. But I've also seen situations where things have not worked out, and sometimes that's not really because the organization wasn't supporting it. There's just sometimes there's some loopholes that you've got to go through, and if you don't do that in the right time frame, it can cause some issues. Especially if it's not the right job. Sometimes we've had more entry-level lab assistants that have tried to do that, and it hasn't been as successful. So it just kind of depends on the organization. But it's definitely a conversation to have to see if the organization's aware what their capacity is for that.
And I'm like Deb, I haven't had any experience with this.
Yeah, I don't know. Would it be safe to say you're better off with a larger employer?
I think in most cases, probably. Our few cases have come from the Philippines, and they were, we just didn't have any problem, but we really haven't seen it a lot. So again, it's been kind of hard for me to say how much trouble you would have because we just don't see it that often. But again, I think through that application process, they can look into that for you. And usually HR can also answer those questions. Usually there's a phone number if you have questions about your application, and that would be something that I would inquire about. Does that organization, support that and see where that goes? Because they may have positions, earmarked that they do.
I've had some experience with this. We've had the privilege of hiring 2 international people in a critical access hospital, and I've had great success with those programs. I've actually been in the position where I'm kind of doing some of the legwork even in the beginning with those folks and their recruiters, and it's just been such a wonderful experience to see them grow in our lab and offer their expertise. We're kind of at the end of or at the beginning of one that just came, and he was from Abu Dhabi, and he's just been super bright, offers a lot of different perspectives and from the quality realm. And I just think that Kim's right. I think your organization has to support it. That's very true. But you, as managers, we kind of have to be the ones to help support that too. So I am so grateful that we took that chance and we did it. So I can speak well of those opportunities.
All right, we have another question. How long should one, quote unquote, put in their time at one facility before finding a new place of employment? I'm happy with where I work, but I feel like at some point I'd want to apply elsewhere to experience a bigger or a smaller lab feel.
I think whenever you're ready. I mean, there isn't a magic number. I mean, when you're talking about moving from job to job, yeah, I mean, job hopping is one thing. If you see long gaps or you don't last very long at some place, but if you've been somewhere for a few years and you can go into an interview and say that the reason that you're looking for that job is that different experience or a different growth potential, that's completely acceptable.
Yeah, I agree with Kim. I would probably put a minimum on it. A lot of times employers put a good 6 months into onboarding new people. So I think you'd want to give it at least a year, but I agree with Kim. I think if you're doing it for the right reasons and you're looking for those additional experiences, good for you.
I agree. I think though you need to be prepared to answer why you left that job. I recently received resumes from someone who had 5 different jobs in 7 years. And Kim mentioned job hopping. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And it might be perfectly valid, maybe moved because of family situation or whatever. Maybe they were promotions and moved to, a different hospital for a better job. But if you're doing the same type of work in the same area and you're moving from hospital to hospital, then I'm going to have some serious questions in the interview process, just because I want to make sure that I'm not hiring someone and I'm going to put 6 months into a training process and then have them leave after a year.
Yeah, of course, I agree with everyone. The job hopping thing is something I look at pretty closely. I want to see someone who kind of has some roots at a facility. But I think if you explain that well in your interview process, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So if you can have the reasons, that's great. I guess I see your question kind of interestingly as you say, put your time in, and then you say that you're happy with your job. So I guess I would just encourage you to look closely at that. There's always room to grow within your own facility too. So if that's something, I mean, if it's just the matter of the size of the hospital and you want to experience a different, sized hospital, I guess that's a real reason. But you might find the grass is always greener on the other side. I guess I just would give that advice. But I think if you're going to go for it, though, you're going to go for a new job, you're changing things up. I think you really have to advocate for yourself in that interview and ask the questions of, is this really a good fit for you? Ask the culture questions, I guess, and just, if you're going to move and uproot and get a whole new team behind you, it has to be a good team. So I think it's your responsibility to figure that piece out. So.
Thank you. And coming from a traveler's perspective, are there specific qualities that you look for when hiring travelers that may be different than a permanent employee?
Well, obviously, what I'm looking for is someone who has some familiarity right up front with the instrumentation that I use in my laboratory, with the laboratory information system that I'm using, and that has some experience. I've had some different experience with travelers, and the intent is to have them in there for a month, well, 3 months, usually, and they have to go through the same competency that everybody else does. And so you want someone who can come in and get signed off on the procedures and the instrumentation and understand the LIS and be able to work. And sometimes, they're the ones that you put on the night shift, which it's just the way things work. And so I'm looking for that, a level of experience, maturity, someone who's got experience and has some good references, but really if I've got Siemens chemistry and Sysmex hematology, and I've got a Sunquest LIS, then that's the first thing I'm looking for is, do you have experience with those instruments and that LIS?
Yeah, and to piggyback on what JR is saying, I think when you're in the interview and you're a traveler, is share what do you do to get yourself up to speed quickly in the new lab? So how do you, what have you done that's successful in previous assignments that allow you to move quickly and adapt quickly to your new role? And I've seen people do it really awesome, just kind of blow me away with how well they come in and take initiative and get up to speed, go through policies and procedures. It's been quite impressive. So that's what you need to sell.
Let's see, I would add to that if I'm actually just bringing a traveler on, what I look for in a traveler, someone who's going to stay with me for 3 months, is in a critical access hospital, we have to be the broadest sense of the word generalist. You're doing phlebotomy, microbiology, and blood banking. So you have to really have all those qualities in a small hospital, and you have to be the fullest sense of the generalist word. To hire a traveler outside of just a travel position is more difficult. I mean, I would say that that's probably true. I think I would always want to fill out my travelers. And sometimes I have the bad connotation, and I admit that this is a stereotype, but once a traveler, always a traveler. But I think that people are always looking to do something different too. So, but you really have to sell that, I think. I think you'd have to really show them that you're ready to put down some roots and stay with a lab. So for me, I would want to hire someone as a traveler for a few months, let them see how they fit into that culture, and then we have those conversations at that point.
All right, and then probably our last question, unless somebody slides in another one. what would make you want to pick an external candidate over an internal candidate?
I just did this with my point of care position, and it really did come down that I had an excellent external candidate. Had all the qualifications, had been a previous point of care coordinator, but it was also really fit. And it was that she came with some sincere research questions of what her role would be. And again, that's where that kind of comes in with that internals need to be as prepared. The outside of one of the other internal candidates, the rest of them had no questions, barely answered the interview questions. Again, came in with kind of, you already know me, and forgot that you still have to sell me. I may know you. Most of them were not my reports, but I knew them from other departments, but I didn't work with them every day. And so they failed to kind of show me again why they were the best candidate. And so, but it really does come down to, for me, it's first and foremost attitude and fit, and experience is why I would choose an external over an internal.
Yeah, I think I'll just piggyback on Kim. I think experience is definitely, if you have more relevant experience, that will really help you over an internal candidate. And then also, I think just how you perform in the interview.
Yeah, I agree with these guys on this one. We recently interviewed a CNO candidate, and that I know that's a different role, but there was something about this person that really drew me. And so for me, it was how she made me feel in that moment, and her culture. And I say the word culture a lot, but that's an important word for me. And it's important to how I feel when it comes to people and the position I'm hiring for. I think it's always hard when you have two equally qualified people when it comes down to the experience, and when you have an internal applicant and an external applicant. Usually that internal is going to win because you want to see your people grow. And I think that that poses a challenge for the external people. So when you can sell your experience and you can sell who you are and what you can bring to the table from a cultural perspective, that's, I think, when you have the better shot.
I think for me, and I agree with everything that everybody said so far. Generally, I would hire someone external if I have a position that I don't have a good internal candidate for. The other piece of that is that you don't want to discount external candidates because they bring in experience that, having worked somewhere else, they have done things differently, and so they can bring that with them when they come in. And a lot of times that's a good thing. Sometimes we did it this way where I used to work. Well, maybe that doesn't fit where you work, but just having a different skill set and a different experience set is helpful for bringing someone in from the outside as opposed to hiring someone from the inside who has been at the same place for a number of years and they've only seen it done one way.
And I know I said that would be last, but I really like this last question. The second half of it. Any particular questions that make you stand out in an interview that you've been asked, not what you asked, but you have been asked? Besides, the salary, et cetera, questions.
I interviewed so long ago. I'm trying to think. And I know there was kind of a general question on preparing for interviews. I think, again, you hope you go to an organization that the questions do revolve around culture and really are behavioral based. You want to get an idea of what the team is, what their beliefs are, what their values are, and if that meshes with what your beliefs and values are. Have those stories. A lot of times your questions are going to be about, what was the above and beyond. and you should be able to pull one of those out at an interview. You should be prepared. I'm always surprised that when people go to an interview and you ask them those questions and they have nothing, like they can't think of anything. And I'm thinking, yeah, come on, this is pretty common. Like they're going to ask you, what have you done? And I mean, I can name, when I ask the question, what have you done for a patient to ensure that they've got the best care or have gone above and beyond? I can tell you 3 stories off the top of my head of 3 patient relationships I have. I mean, you've got to have those things to show what you've done. And so it is some prep. I'm trying to think if anybody else has any, but really there is a lot of move towards these kind of organizational value-based questions. And so be prepared that they're going to ask you, how do you handle, conflict and relationships and teams and those kind of cultural questions.
Yeah, one that we'll ask is, think of the last time you made a mistake and, what did you do to turn it around and fix it? And I am surprised how many people will say, I can't think of something. And that, that's not right. We've all made mistakes. So I agree with Kim. I think the key, and you have it on your question here, is practice, and find somebody that you can practice an interview with, because that's really going to help prepare you. Think of some of the obvious questions. I mean, even if they're the obvious questions, if you're really comfortable and prepared for those, that'll help you with the questions that you aren't expecting.
Yeah, I guess my advice would be to just kind of be yourself in the interview. I know that's cliche, but the more you relax and just let them and show them who you are, the more successful your interview is going to really be. I think one of the other questions you asked, I think, is maybe you're asking us, what question should you be asking the interviewees? And I think a piece of advice I can offer is, as you go through the interview and the whole process, maybe maybe you're there and you're meeting the team, but think of those questions as you're going along through your interview. Jot them down so you're ready to ask some educated questions at the end. It'll show that you're really engaged in that interview and interested in the organization. I think it's good to have those general culture questions ready to go too, but I think you'll find that you'll have questions as the interview process goes along. But always ask a question, as Kim said. I think it's important to ask a few questions at the end.
I've been incredibly impressed with interviewees who take notes.
Yeah.
And that's very seldom. And I am always impressed when I'm going through an interview and they take notes and then they have questions, and they don't think that any question, it has to be the stellar question. Ask questions. We want to know that you want to know about the job. That tells us that you're engaged with it, you're interested in it. If you don't have any questions, it's kind of like, I can't believe that. I don't believe anybody goes to an interview and has no questions about the potential job they're going to take. But yeah, think about those kind of things. What do you want to have answered? Like with the point of care, it was great. She asked about if, it was a simple question of like, so is this just a hospital program, or I'm going to be responsible for clinics? Having some of that research was such an excellent question. Nobody had thought to even ask me that, but that's a big deal if you were going to take this job. If all of a sudden I told you, oh yeah, you've got 4 hospitals to take care of, about 3,000 users. Oh, and you have all our clinics. That might change their mind if this is the job for them. So, just, having a little bit of research and being willing to ask those questions, I think is really important.
That's wonderful, guys. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your Sunday evening to be one of our panelists. I know there's a couple of questions in the chat, but I think we've run out of time. I think you've given us all a lot of really good food for thought for our next interview or our next, life role, or even role in ASCLS, hopefully. Something to think about. So thank you guys very much. And I wish you the absolute best 2021 possible.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Awesome.